Good. Let's continue where we were yesterday. It could be I'm going to have to take a break today. What did we learn up to now? We've learned up to now in this mimer, this Hasidic discourse in the book Torah Or, which was written by the first Rebbe of Chabad. He explaining to us that today we have prayer, Torah, and commandments. Prayer, Torah, and commandments. And this corresponds to the Torah and the commandments that corresponds to nowadays the tabernacle. The tabernacle had, in the desert, the tabernacle had curtains all around it that defined the boundaries of the tabernacle. Here, let's see, tabernacle in the desert, tabernacle. We have the picture of it. Here we go, tabernacle in the wilderness. Right. So that, Shalom Abba. Okay, so here we have in this week's Torah portion. I might have to stop this class early because I might have to take my wife somewhere. So we explained up to now in very length, very beautifully, how it is that nowadays we have Torah and tefillah, Torah and tefillah, and commandments. Learning the Torah, that's like the vessels that were in the tabernacle. Let's see, we have a picture of the vessels. There were the altar on the outside, and the inside there was the menorah, the candelabra, and we have the showbread, the face bread. Here's a little bit of a picture of it. And the Rebbe explained how it is exactly that the 7 branches of the menorah that corresponds to the oral Torah, the written Torah, and the face bread, and is corresponds to the Torah. The Torah is also called bread, etc. And the curtains which are around that corresponds to the commandments, because the commandments, when we do them, we don't understand them. It doesn't go inside of us. It just surrounds us. And we have today Shabbat, also prayer, but mainly Shabbat. Shabbat is elevation of the worlds, and also God reacting to that elevation. Shabbat, everything, so to speak, comes down. The day of Shabbat comes down. Godliness comes down into the world. Love, it's a feeling of love of God. In the weekdays, the prayer of the weekdays that elevates us. That's what's called the lower love of God, that we love God, even without reciprocation, even without inspiration. And Shabbat is a day of pure inspiration that God inspires us. Oh, so the Rebbe says this corresponds to the tabernacle. And we see a very interesting thing, that when Moses commanded the Jewish people to build the tabernacle, so that's this week's Torah portion, this week's Torah, next week. First thing he starts off is with Shabbat. Then after that, he talks about building the curtains. Then after that, he talks about the vessels. That's this week. But 2 weeks ago, when God commanded Moses, he did it in exactly the opposite order. He finished with Shabbat instead of starting with Shabbat. He's finished with Shabbat, and he started with the vessels. So here he puts the vessels last. And that's when Moses gave to the Jewish people. When God commanded the Jews, he put the vessels first. Okay, so why? Now we're going to understand why. Why is this? What does it mean to us? Here we go. I'll be called now, according to everything that we said before. When we explain what are the curtains that are around the tabernacle and the kelim and the different vessels that are inside, the different furniture that's used inside of the tabernacle of the Mishkan, that they are the level. Oh, let's see a picture. We got a picture here. That they are the level of that they are the level of Torah and the commandments, like we said before, and also Shabbat. We've explained what is Shabbat. That Shabbos is the idea of the extra soul, the extra sensitivity to God, that God gives and joins us with his Ratzon Elyon, his upper will, with Ratzon Atachton, with our lower will. Now we can understand too, but we can understand it very well why it is. Excuse me, just one moment. Excuse me, one moment. Okay, so now we can understand why it is that here we go. So we're going to stop. Okay. Now we can understand what's the connection between the commandment of Shabbat before the commandment of of building the tabernacle. Why it is in Parashat Kitisa, there it comes last, and over here it comes first. Ach, at Shabbatotay Tishmeru. V'gam also why the Moshe Rabbeinu Hikdim, why does he say Shabbat? First of all, Shabbat, before the Melechat HaKodesh, exactly the opposite of what it said before when God commanded him. Okay, now, Ki im heyot, even though, do this, okay, even though that by means of Torah and the commandments, we draw down what we said, this surrounding level of godliness, and we draw down what's called the inner level of godliness through the commandments, the surrounding level of godliness, which is called Soviv Kolomim, and Panim is the inner level of godliness, it's called Mamali Kolomim. The Torah goes inside of us, in that they are garments and food for the soul that should be revealed in the soul in an inner way by means of the Torah, in the inner way, and Makif in the surrounding way by means of the commandments. But be'emet, really, Kivan Sha'adam, since that a person is below in a physical body, it's impossible for him to reach this upper level of godliness now that we haven't got any temple. Shalamayla, Maila, Nikol almost above all the worlds. Lamshich, to draw down from them light from God. Therefore, there has to be, first of all, an arousal from below that will arouse the soul and elevate it to reach this revelation of the upper will of God. Va'aliyazu, this is Shabbat, Loshen Tashav, return. So this week, when Moses tells it over to the Jewish people, the first thing he gives is Shabbat. Because what's Shabbat? Shabbat is everything returns back to God. Aliyot Olamot, all the worlds go up, so to speak. The worlds obtain more meaning on Shabbat. Every detail is a little bit more announcing that it's being created on Shabbat, from below to above. The Maila above the highest, reaching to the highest levels, which that's the upper will of God. Shabbat reaches to the place where God chose the Jews. Therefore, Shabbat is only for the Jews, but we're in the world. So Shabbat, especially the beginning of Shabbat, when Shabbat comes in, so everything goes up, elevation. I need to feel it. So Moses was first of all telling the Jews, you want to build a tabernacle? First of all, remember you have a gift from God, which is called Shabbat. And what does that do? It elevates you from below to above. It inspires you to want God more. Also in a person, there's this what's called elevation. What is this? This is the extra soul we said before on Shabbat. On Shabbat, you have more of a desire first of all, you have more of an awareness that there is such a thing as God, and you have more of a desire to want to reveal him. The Achakak, afterwards, is drawn down from this level to all the days of the week by means of the prayer of the days of the week, which we said before, that's called the ladder. And by means of this, you're able to draw down afterwards into the Torah and the commandments, the same thing. So Shabbat in a one word is inspiration. Shabbat is inspiration day. Shabbat, you're inspired to want to elevate yourself to the Creator. You realize that there's much, much more to the world than what you think it is. Much, much more. And then the essence of Shabbat is you realize there's much more to God than you think it is. Then you have a revelation, a feeling of what God is. And God is not a spiritual feeling. It's not a spiritual feeling. God is an all-encompassing feeling of meaning, of life, which encompasses the spiritual also. This is drawing down light from above to below, which is not the case without preceding this Shabbat. It's impossible to draw down anything into the Torah and the commandments. Like it says, anyone who says, all I have is learning Torah, he doesn't have Torah, because the high thing of the idea of Shabbat is that the world calls out that there's God. The world shows how important it is. On Shabbat, God stopped creating the world in order to sort of peek behind the curtains and show you, now I'm showing you the world as a creation. Well, therefore, but see, when Moses commanded the Jewish people to make the Mishkan, first of all, he started with Shabbat, because Shabbat is inspiration day. It inspires us to want to elevate ourselves more, our consciousness, to reveal that there's a creation, how important the world is. And even more, it elevates us to reveal how important God is. And afterwards, it is commanded, God, then afterwards, Moses commands to make the Uriot, the curtains of the Mishkan, that this is surrounding levels, that's by means of the commandments. The commandments that we said, that surrounds us. And afterwards, Moses commands on the vessels, which that's the Torah. And that's what it means. So, kolam shacham milamay lamata, when we draw godliness from above to below, first of all, it has to be drawn down in a surrounding way. And then after that, it can be drawn down into an inner way. Maybe we can say in a way that this is the whole idea of Chabad going out and putting tefillin on people. The Chassid Chabad himself, the representative of the Rebbe, that's like Shabbat. That's showing that there is such a thing as God. There is such a thing as God caring about the world. There is such a thing as a blessing. It inspires the person to want to do something. Then after that, the person does a mitzvah, a commandment. He doesn't understand what he's doing. That's like the curtains around the tabernacle. And then after that, you can sit with him and learn Torah. That goes inside. That's and the commandments, everything remains in a surrounding way. You don't understand it. Therefore, Moses, first of all, started out with Shabbat. That's inspiration. Then, because he's talking about nowadays, that's Moses talking to the Jews. It's not God talking to Moses in the beginning. When God spoke to Moses, he could put Shabbat last, and we'll find out why later, in a moment. I have to take my wife to somewhere. That's the idea. What says anyone who says Shema Yisrael without tefillin, as though he's giving false testimony. The commandments have to come first. First of all, the person does the commandments. He does what God wants. And then afterwards, he understands. That's on Mount Sinai. When the Jews got the Torah, they said, Na'aseh, we will do what you say. But Nishma, afterwards, we'll understand. Because tefillin, when a person, first of all, puts on tefillin, this is also Shema and etc. inside of the tefillin. But it's in a surrounding way. It's just a commandment. But when you say Shema Yisrael, that sentence is from the Torah. You want to understand. You say this after you come to love God. This is in an inner way. And therefore, first of all, you have to have the surrounding level. That's doing the commandments. That's like the curtains around the tabernacle. And afterwards, you can have the inside. When you say Shema Yisrael, without tefillin, Shema Yisrael, that's like the Torah. Without tefillin, without the commandment, then it's called false testimony. It's called you're giving false testimony. And we're going to have to make a short break over here because I have to go somewhere, and I will return in another 10 minutes. So if you have something to do for 10 minutes, you can do it. I'm sorry. This is not my, this is out of my control. Here we go. But let's resume where we left off. Here we go. It was a short break. Okay. So what did we say? When Moses gave the commandment to the Jewish people to build the tabernacle in this week's Torah portion, so he began with Shabbat. And after that, he talked about the curtains. And after that, he talked about the vessels, which were in the tabernacle. Why? Because that's the way we have to serve God now, without the temple. Without the temple. Moses was giving to the Jewish people from below to above. They had to inspire them first to build the tabernacle. So that's the same thing with Shabbat. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is a relationship, an intimate relationship, an emotional relationship with God. Let me just see 1 second here. Clean all the windows over here so the lighting is a little bit weird. Here we go. 1 second, 1 minute. There it goes. There we go. Oh, that's a little better, huh? Maybe. All right. So that's what we have to do. First of all comes Shabbat. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is a relationship with God. Shabbat is God's day. You don't do anything. Shabbat is the day. Most of the commandments of Shabbat are prohibitions. Don't do anything. Like somebody gives you a precious diamond, You value it, right? Don't scratch it, don't lose it. Same thing as Shabbat. So Shabbat is a gift in two ways. First of all, it's an inspiration from below to above. It's that it inspires us that we realize that there is such a thing as God, and that God is creating us, and that God is that He's providing for us, and He loves us, and He took us out of Egypt. That there is such a thing. That's what's called the beginning of Shabbat, the elevation of Shabbat. The Shabbat is the letters of Tashav. And then the high level of Shabbat, what they're going to call the essence of Shabbat, that's that God inspires us. This all takes place in what's called the extra soul. On Shabbat, you get an extra soul. The extra soul means that you start feeling that God is more real than me. And then you start to feel that all there is really is God, that God is really creating everything. The world is an amazing, amazing, tremendously complicated miracle. Everything in the world is just a big miracle. That's Shabbat. Shabbat is God's day. It's not the world day. And then that draws down into the 6 days of work. That's the Torah and the commandments. Beginning with the commandments, those are the curtains that go around. The commandments, that's a surrounding level of godliness, which is drawn into our service of God. Shabbat is not so much our service, it's our appreciation. Then once we appreciate God, then the service that we serve God, we realize who we're serving, whose Torah it is, whose commandments it is that we're doing. First of all, it begins with the commandments. The commandments are serving God in a general way that anyone can do. You put on the command, you put on tefillin, anybody can put on tefillin. It surrounds you, it encompasses you. And the Torah, it's almost like hugging somebody. Hugging, you can hug anybody. The Torah is like kissing. Torah is like kissing. Kissing, you don't kiss everybody, right? Only the people that your brother, your father, your mother, your wife, your whatever, your children, things that are very. That's more of an internal connection, especially because Torah is even more. Torah is like food. Torah you take inside. So first of all, you start with Shabbat. That's from our point of view. When Moses told the Jewish people, first of all, inspiration, then the commandments. Then you can bring godliness into everything in the world. That's the purpose of Judaism. The purpose of Judaism is that you'll feel that everything in the world has a purpose. Everything in the world is important to God, every detail. And that's brought out by the commandments and especially by the Torah. By the Torah. And especially by the oral Torah, especially by the Talmud. That everything in this world is important. All of this, Seder, Uz, Be'inyan, Avodas Adam. That's all this order we talked about is the order of how we serve God. Avodat Adam. That's how Moses commanded the Jewish people in Parshas Vayakhel, this week's Torah portion. But how things are actually drawn from God into the worlds, this is exactly the opposite. Good morning, Toby. Good morning. Into the worlds, it's exactly the opposite. How does God draw godliness into the world? How is it drawn into the world? This is the opposite of how we serve from below to above. From below to above, we have to have inspiration first. Then after that, the commandments, the commandments are represented by the curtains, which go around the whole, the tabernacle. And after that, then the Torah, which is the vessels. But when God gave it to Moses, he's talking about not what we do, but what God does. God from above to below is exactly the opposite. In the beginning, first of all, there are the vessels. That was talked about in 3 weeks ago in Parshas Truma. After that, the Urios. After that, the curtains. That was also the end of the Truma. The Achakak, and afterwards, Shabbat, that's in Parshas Tisa. That was last week's Torah portion. Why? First of all, there's the vessels. After that, that's the commandments. After that, there's the Torah. And then after that, there's Shabbat. Okay, so the vessels, we said, the curtains, that's what the vessels, that's what's called an inner light. The curtains, that's a surrounding light. And Shabbat, we said that's inspiration. Let's see how that's from below to above. Let's see how it works from God's point of view. Key. Liot, how does God draw godliness into the world? Because drawing godliness into the world has to be with a tzimtzum rav, a tremendous contraction and a tremendous articulation of God's oneness, that it should be revealed only a little tiny ray of godliness in the world in order that the world should be able to exist. And the world should not be negated in their existence. That's what implied when it says that God spoke and he created the world. This is the idea of the vessels of the Mishkan, that is panimi, inside. Let's just take one step back and let's understand what's going on over here. The point of Judaism is that everybody should know God. The point of Judaism is that everyone should know God, that God is creating the world and there's a purpose for the world, and that only the Jewish people are given the ability and the job to reveal this purpose in the world. So first of all, it starts off that God exists and he's creating the world. How can God exist and create in the world? God is infinite. How is the world? The world is so complicated. The world can get along on its own, right? Says, yeah, it can, but God doesn't want it that way. God wants you to realize that he is creating everything. So how does God do this? If God is infinite, then how is the world finite? I have a car sitting outside. It's my car. It's not my next door neighbor's car. My car is not my house, right? A car is not a tree. Everything is different from everything else. How do you get God over there? How is the God? It says not only that you read the Kabbalistic books, you read that there's all these spiritual worlds and things like that. Those things, that's not God. So how does God create all those things? It means there's something separate from him, right? It says no, it's not separate from him. God somehow or other articulates his oneness, his reality, and he brings it into the world. This ability of God to form his reality, to bring his reality down so that it can create a world, that's like the vessels. That's like the vessels. God puts his light into vessels. That's like the commandments, right? The commandments are in vessels. There was the menorah was one thing. Afterwards, this revelation is drawn down into a bigger revelation. That's what's called makif, surrounding the worlds. Surrounding the worlds. That's the idea of the ureos of the Mishkan. That's the commandments. Commandments. So first of all, we have the vessels. The vessels, that's like the Torah. I'm sorry if I said differently. The vessels, that's like the Torah. First of all, it starts off with the vessels that God contracts. That's like the Torah. We said that articulates. It's inside. Then after that, God can bring down a higher level of light in the world. That's the Reis of the Mishkan. That's in Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh. This is talking about the commandment of God to Moses. First of all, you talk about the vessels. Namely, God is telling Moses how I contract my light to the world. Then afterwards, the Ureos. Then afterwards, God can make a bigger aspect of light of God. That's called the surrounding level. That's like the commandments. This is how it goes from above to below. First of all, God makes contract like the God's name Yud. That's small. that's like the Torah. The Torah is very, very contracted. All these different ideas and different arguments. Then afterwards, there's the letter Hey. The letter Hey is bigger. That's like the commandments. The commandments are bigger. It's a higher level of God. Therefore, and then afterwards, finally, is Shabbat. That's this in last week's Torah portion. Why? Why is Shabbat come last? And it's like this: the vessels and the curtains. This is how God draws down from above to below. First of all, like we see in the Torah Bible, what does it say? God spoke. He creates the world. God spoke, and he created a firmament. God spoke, and he made birds. He spoke, and he made the stars, and he made this bird. He made all these. That's how God, so to speak, contracts himself down. That's like the Torah. That's like the blueprints of the world, the Torah. Then afterwards, God can make a bigger revelation of the world. Once the world is there, then he can make a bigger revelation of the world. That's like the last day. That's like Adam. Adam can do what God wants. That's like the commandments. And afterwards, finally, when God finishes everything from above to below, then is Shabbat. Then it's a different type of a Shabbat. This is a Shabbat, a menucha v'histalkus al atzmuto. This is not Shabbat we talked about here that Moses is speaking this week. Inspiration. This is talking about the final goal. The final goal. Kibo Shabbat. In it, God rested. V'yanafesh. And he, what is it? God reached the essence of the soul of God, if you want to call it. Ka'adam HaShovet, like a person that rests, that everything goes back up to its source. I think we can explain this. When we think about the world, so we think about, let's say, according to Jewish terms, that the world is exactly 5,700 years old. And the world has a limit to it. The world is a limit. It's the day when it was created and the day when it's going to end, right? So what's going to be afterwards? What's going to be? What's going to be? The world is limited. So we're just in this little bubble of whatever is time, floating in the infinite, expanse of nothingness, of infinite nothingness. And so what's the purpose of the thing? So the Rebbe wants to say, no, it's not so. The fact is, we don't know what infinity is, but infinity is when you do Torah and the commandments. That's real what infinity is. When a Jew does a commandment, or to a certain degree, when any person in the world does what he's supposed to do according to the Torah, then that action is infinite. It's before, and it's after. It's before the world existed, and it's after the world existed, because before God created the world, there was no such thing as before. There was no time. We can't understand it. That's what it means. God conceals himself. But the fact of the matter is that every time you do something in this world, which is according to what God wants, that thing is infinite. That's infinite. That's Shabbat reveals that. That's what Shabbat is. Shabbat reveals it, because the world is God's world. It's not our world. God's world means that everything is infinite. It doesn't belong to me. This is incomprehensible. We can't understand this now. The Rebbe is sort of trying to explain it to us. And not only is trying to explain it, he's trying to explain that we can feel it. Okay, so it starts off like this. First of all, God has the ability to limit his oneness. His oneness. That's like the Torah. Therefore, when God commands Moses, he starts off with the vessels. Because the vessels of the tabernacle, that's like the Torah. Details. Then afterwards, God can reveal a bigger aspect of godliness in the world. That's through the service of man, doing the commandments, what he wants. That's a bigger aspect. That's what's called how God surrounds the world. Then when God commanded Moses, therefore second thing was he talked about the curtains. That's like the commandments. And the last thing is Shabbat. Why? Because Shabbat is the goal. Shabbat is the revelation of what we've been doing all this time. We've been doing Torah and the commandments. We thought they were limited by time, but they weren't. We thought that what we did in this world was temporal. It's here today and gone tomorrow. It's not so. What we're doing is an infinite thing. It was there before time existed. It's after time existed. It's totally above and beyond time. It's taking time and elevating it to above time. Infinitely meaningful. Maybe I can give an example, and I'm just, I'm going out on a limb over here, but maybe I'm an example. A person that, let's say, he spends a minute with his father. His father, the one time, right, at his wedding, his father came and gave him a kiss, right? Whatever. Time with his mother hugged him with it. Okay, that thing that they did, a meaningful thing, it's always there. And sometimes it can be that one moment, a meaningful moment in a person's life, is more real than anything that person does in the rest of his life. He always remembers that. He goes into business and he wins things. And the one thing he always remembers is, right, this one moment. This one moment with his parents, with this one moment, the thing that always stands out. It's more real than anything else. That made his life sort of worthwhile. Well, it's the same thing with Torah and commandments. When a person does Torah and commandments, that's a unique uniting with the creator of the universe. That's more meaningful. Of course, here it's more real. It's like more. That's revealed on Shabbat. Therefore, it says the commandment of Shabbat is afterwards is last. When God commanded it, he said Shabbat last. Why? It's not relevant that everything should go back to its source only if, first of all, there was action in the world. There was something that we did. And then after we do infinite things in this world, the Torah, the commandments, good deeds, then afterwards there can be Shabbat and reveal it. First of all, there has to be what's called a straight light, that we do things and draw down light from above to below. Or in our case, God creates the world and making vessels, which that's like the Torah, and the rails, that's like the commandments. And then there can be afterwards returning light, that's Shabbat. Everything goes back up to its source. That's also the idea of the raising of the dead. All the dead people raise up. That's Shabbat. That's the ultimate Shabbat. The dead raise up means you and everything that you did in your life. Suddenly you realize that it wasn't just a small amount of time. It was infinite, which is not the case, the service of a person from below to above. This has to be, first of all, an inspiration. Shabbat. That's this week how Moses explains it to the Jewish people. First of all, there has to be elevation. That's Shabbat, first of all. That elevates us to the highest. And then afterwards, we can draw godliness down from above to below. This is what's called God's upper will, Hamidgaleh, which was revealed on the day of Shabbat, first of all. And then Hamshacha, drawing down. This is by means of Torah and the commandments. First of all, we do the commandments. That's the surrounding level. And then the garments, that's the Torah. So again, when God commands Moses, how does he do it? First of all, that's in Parshas Truma. First of all, he talks about the vessels. That's like the Torah. That's how God contracts himself, so to speak, contracts his light. Then after that, he talks about the curtains. That's the commandments. That's a bigger revelation of God. And afterwards, it's Shabbat, how everything is everything goes back up to its source. You reveal the true oneness of God. That's from God's point of view. That's what we learned 2-3 weeks ago. But our Torah portion, Shabbat is first. That's inspiration. Shabbat is inspiration. And after that, then there can be the commandments, because that's a general way of serving God. And after that, there can be the details. It comes inside of us. Excuse me. So when Moses commanded to the Jewish people, he put Shabbat first because there has to be inspiration. But when God commanded it to Moses, he's telling Moses what God is telling Moses, what God himself did in order to create the world. First of all, God made a contraction. That's like the letter Yud of God's name. That's the Torah. Afterwards, it's a bigger revelation of light. That's the letter, like the letter Hey of God's name. And that's the commandments. And afterwards can be Shabbat. Then everything goes back up to its source. You reveal what you did. To draw this down, this comes first of all, you have to have a surrounding level and a guard and a garment. That this is the idea of the commandments, the Urios. And afterwards there can be the vessels. That's the level of the Torah, which this is the wisdom of God, etc., drawing down into God's kindness. Kindness, that's the positive commandments, etc. And this is coming down from a high place to a low place. That's the creation of the world. That's the Torah. It's drawn down from a high place to a low place, and it comes down low into the world. That's the idea of Pia Patcha B'Chachma. That's the idea of the Torah beginning everything. That's from God's point of view. The Torah begins everything. This is called the Torah Chesed. Why? Because it draws down godliness from the beginning to create the whole world. So the world is created according to the Torah. Okay, so what's the Rebbe explaining over here? The Rebbe has explained to us the tabernacle was a microcosm of all creation. The beginning, the tabernacle was a microcosm of the creation that God creates from above to below. After the actual building of the tabernacle was a microcosm of our serving God from below to above. Therefore, from below to above, and this week, that's talking about below to above, our building it starts off with Shabbat, inspiration. After that are the curtains, that's the commandments, a general light of God. And afterwards is the Torah, that's specific light of God. That's the vessels. That's how when Moses received the commandment from God, God did not start out with Shabbat. Shabbat is the finale, the end, when all of our service of God gets elevated. That's at the end. How does it start off? First of all, there is the vessels, the Torah. That's how God contracts himself. That's the blueprint of the world. Then afterwards, we can do the commandments. That's a general light of God. And as I said before, Shabbat, that's an elevation of everything above. What's the Rebbe trying to tell us today? What's the Rebbe trying to point out to us today? First of all, that God exists. Secondly, that God cares about us. Three, that God reacts to what we do. God inspires us. God wants us to serve him. God helps us to serve him. And the final goal of all of this is that the revelation of how infinitely important this world, there was nothing before it and there'll be nothing afterward. This world is pure godliness revealed. There were no worlds that were before this world, and there's not going to be any worlds that are after this world. But the importance of what this world is right now is only going to be revealed in Shabbat in the end. That's the whole goal of Mashiach and the raising of the dead. But meanwhile, what's going to bring to this is the Torah and the commandments. And that's represented by the vessels of the tabernacle. That's the Torah. And the curtains around it, that's the commandments. Good. Now let us...